Welcome back. Tonight, we're settling into something different. Not a timeline, not a character study, but a question that's been humming beneath the surface of this franchise for over a decade now. What is it about Five Nights at Freddy's that transformed a simple indie game into one of the most influential horror experiences of the 21st century? How did a solo developer working with limited tools and a modest budget create something that would reshape not just gaming, but internet culture itself? We'll explore the unexpected beginnings, the revolutionary simplicity, the mysteries that consumed millions, the communities that formed around flickering monitors, and the legacy that continues to echo through every corner of horror gaming today. Whether you're here because you lived through those early days when Markiplier's screams first echoed across YouTube, or you discovered this world through the recent movie adaptation that shattered box office records, or you're simply letting these words wash over you as sleep pulls you under, this journey will trace every element that elevated Five Nights at Freddy's from a small experiment to a cultural phenomenon. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this kind of slow, thoughtful exploration that unfolds like a conversation between old friends. And let me know in the comments what your first experience with FNAF was, whether you played it yourself or watched someone else brave those haunted halls. It's always fascinating to see how the same terror touched different people in different ways. Let's begin. The unexpected genesis of a horror empire. In the quiet corners of game development, where Christian-themed adventure titles and family-friendly projects struggled to find audiences, a man named Scott Cawthon faced a crossroads that would change gaming history. Born in Bell County, Texas, on June 4th, 1978, Cawthon had spent years creating games with the noblest intentions. He was a devout Christian who genuinely believed that video games could teach values, spread messages of faith, and provide wholesome entertainment for children and families. His early works, titles like The Pilgrim's Progress, adapted from the classic religious allegory, and The Desolate Hope, with its dystopian industrial landscapes, were crafted with care and dedication. These games featured adventure elements, role-playing mechanics, and unique art styles that would later resurface in projects like FNAF World. But despite positive reception in Christian circles for their narrative depth and evangelistic intent, they achieved minimal commercial success beyond those niche religious communities. The financial reality was harsh. These passion projects, often self-funded and targeted at limited audiences, brought in perhaps $40 or $50 each month, according to interviews Cawthon gave years later. He worked retail jobs at places like Dollar General and Target as late as 2014 to support his wife Miriam and their growing family, which would eventually include 6 children. The struggle wore on him. He spent roughly 12 years dedicating his free time to Christian media, creating games and animations through ventures like Hope Animation, are described as a project of Christian animators aiming to spread the teachings of Jesus Christ. Yet the harsh truth of secular markets and the inherent challenges of appealing to broad demographics with overt religious content meant his work remained largely invisible to the wider gaming world. By 2013, Cawthon's financial situation had become dire enough that he faced a genuine crisis of faith. He later described thinking he had squandered his life by becoming a game developer, even entertaining thoughts of suicide. When his life insurance policy was cancelled after the company discovered he had expressed suicidal ideation to his doctor, he reached a devastating conclusion that now even his death had no value. In that dark moment, he turned to prayer, asking God to use him somehow, to give his efforts meaning. What happened next transformed not just his life but the landscape of horror gaming forever. Cawthon decided to try one more time, creating a family-friendly construction and management game called Chipper and Sons Lumber Company. In 2013, the game featured cute animal characters running a lumber business designed to be accessible and wholesome. He submitted it to review sites and platforms, hoping this departure from explicitly religious content might finally find an audience. Instead, the criticism that came back was devastating, but also strangely specific. Reviewers complained that the characters, these innocent animals, meant to be charming and approachable, looked like scary animatronic animals. Their movements were stiff. Their appearances fell into an uncanny valley that made players deeply uncomfortable. A reviewer, James Stephanie Sterling, even called the game terrifying, though not in a way Cawthon had intended. Initially, this feedback pushed Cawthon deeper into depression. He had failed again. Even when trying to make something simple and fun, he had somehow created something unsettling. He considered abandoning game development entirely, walking away from the dream that had consumed years of his life. But something shifted in his thinking. With his faith restored through that earlier prayer, he began to see the criticism differently. What if instead of running from this unintentional creepiness, he leaned into it? What if he made something that was deliberately, intentionally scary, using these very elements that had disturbed players? The animatronic quality that had been a flaw could become a feature. The unsettling nature of his character designs could be weaponized into genuine horror. And so, in the summer of 2014, working alone using a game engine called ClickTeam Fusion, the same tool he had used for his previous projects, Scott Cawthon began developing what would become Five Nights at Freddy's. He conceived of a survival horror game set in a family pizzeria. Inspired by places like Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza that had populated American childhoods with their animatronic performers. The premise was deceptively simple. You play as a night security guard, Mike Schmidt, working the midnight to 6 a.m. shift at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a once successful establishment now fallen into disrepair. The animatronics, Freddy Fazbear the Bear, Bonnie the Rabbit, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox are supposed to stay on their stages, but they don't. They wander. They move through the building, and if they reach your office, you die. Interestingly, when designing the cast, Cawthon had initially considered bringing over the beaver design from Chipper and Sons as the fourth character, alongside Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica. But he ultimately decided against it, feeling it was too on the nose, given how that game had inspired FNAF in the first place. Instead, he chose a fox, creating Foxy the Pirate, who would become one of the franchise's most beloved characters. This decision, this pivot away from what was familiar towards something fresh, characterized Cawthon's approach to the entire project. He was learning from failure, transforming criticism into innovation, building something that felt both familiar in its setting, but revolutionary in its execution. The game featured pre-rendered 3D graphics, static camera views, and limited player movement. You sat in one office, monitoring security cameras, closing metal doors, and turning on lights to check for approaching threats. Every action consumed power from a limited supply, and if you ran out before 6 a.m., the lights went dark, the doors opened, and death became inevitable. The animatronics themselves were brought to life through Cawthon's careful rendering and animation work, their jerky movements and lifeless eyes creating exactly the kind of uncanny valley effect that had plagued Chipper and Sons now repurposed into deliberate terror. Jump scares punctuated every failure, unsudden flashes of screaming animatronic faces accompanied by piercing shrieks that made players leap from their seats. Cawthon submitted Five Nights at Freddy's to Steam's Greenlight system in the summer of 2014, releasing a trailer and later a demo to build interest. He also submitted it to IndieDB and Desura, a digital distribution platform. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The trailer alone generated buzz, with its ominous atmosphere and promise of a unique horror experience. On August 8, 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's was released on Desura, followed by a Steam release on August 18th. Just 5 days after the Desura launch, a YouTuber named Markiplier uploaded his first playthrough video titled "Warning, Scariest Game in Years." That video would eventually accumulate over 114 million views, becoming his most watched Let's Play ever, and fundamentally altering the trajectory of both the game and YouTube gaming culture. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The point here, in this origin story, is understanding just how unlikely this success was. Scott Cawthon was not a developer with marketing budgets and corporate backing. He was a struggling father working retail, creating games in whatever spare time he could find, using tools that were accessible but limited compared to industry standard engines. He had no track record of commercial success. His previous works had languished in obscurity, and yet, by taking the criticism that nearly broke him and transforming it into intentional design, by channeling his technical skills and storytelling instincts into something genuinely frightening, he created a game that would gross hundreds of millions of dollars, spawn 13 main games and numerous spin-offs by 2025, launch an international multimedia franchise, and fundamentally change how indie horror games were made and marketed. This genesis matters because it establishes one of FNAF's core appeals from the very beginning. It was homegrown, authentic, born from genuine struggle and creative problem-solving, rather than corporate calculation. Players could feel that authenticity. They could sense that this wasn't a product designed by committee to hit demographic targets. This was one person's vision, refined and released with remarkable speed. The first game came out in August 2014. The second game, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, was released in November of that same year, just 3 months later. The third installment arrived in March 2015. The fourth came in July 2015. This rapid-fire release schedule was unheard of for a franchise building such momentum, and it kept the fan base constantly engaged, always hungry for the next piece of the puzzle. By the time Cawthon slowed down the release pace, the foundation was unshakable. Five Nights at Freddy's had gone from a last-ditch effort by a desperate developer to one of the most recognizable names in gaming, and it all started with the decision to embrace rather than reject the uncanny, to weaponize the uncomfortable into entertainment. The revolutionary power of simplicity. When you strip Five Nights at Freddy's down to its mechanical core, what you find is something almost shockingly simple. And that simplicity, far from being a weakness, became one of its greatest strengths. At a time when horror games were trending toward complex mechanics, sprawling environments, and elaborate combat systems, FNAF did the opposite. It confined you to a single room. It gave you 3 basic actions: check cameras, close doors, turn on lights. It limited your most precious resource, electricity, forcing you to make impossible choices between safety and survival. And it built terror not through graphic violence or grotesque imagery, but through anticipation, paranoia, and the constant threat of sudden death. Let's examine exactly how this works, because the genius is in the details, and you begin each night sitting in the security office of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. On the desk in front of you is a monitor showing feeds from 11 different security cameras positioned throughout the building. These cameras let you see the show stage where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica start the night. The dining area with its rows of tables and party decorations. The backstage area cluttered with spare parts and endoskeletons. The various hallways and closets that connect these spaces. And Pirate Cove, where Foxy hides behind a curtain. To your left and right are doorways, the only entrances to your office. Each doorway has a light button that illuminates the blind spot just outside the door, and a door button that slams down a heavy metal barrier. The animatronics begin to move at midnight. Each one has different behaviors, at different paths through the building, different tells that signal their approach. Bonnie tends to move through the left side of the building, appearing in the West Hall before eventually reaching your left door. Chica prefers the right side, often stopping in the kitchen where you can't see her, but can hear the clatter of pots and pans, then advancing through the East Hall to your right door. Freddy moves slowly, almost leisurely, laughing occasionally as he progresses from the show stage through the building, becoming more active as the night wears on. Foxy is different, hiding in Pirate Cove until he decides to sprint down the West Hall in a dead run, slamming against your door if you don't close it in time. Each animatronic operates on AI patterns that become more aggressive as nights progress, and their behaviors have just enough randomness that you can never fully predict their movements. Your job is to survive until 6 a.m. by monitoring these movements and responding appropriately. If an animatronic appears in the doorway light, you slam the door and keep it closed until they leave. If they're approaching but haven't arrived yet, you need to decide whether to keep checking cameras to track their position or conserve power by sitting in darkness. Here's where the brilliance of the power mechanic comes in. You start each night with 100% power, and it drains continuously just from the passage of time. But every action accelerates that drain. Viewing the cameras pulls power. Leaving lights on pulls power. Having doors closed pulls power. And having both doors closed simultaneously drains it frighteningly fast. If you run out of power before 6 a.m., everything shuts down. The lights die, the doors open, the monitor goes black. You're left sitting in darkness with a limited battery-powered emergency light that illuminates only your immediate vicinity, waiting for the inevitable. Freddy's music box begins to play, a haunting melody that signals your doom. And then he appears, his eyes glowing in the darkness, before the jump scare ends your night. This creates a constant state of tension that most horror games struggle to achieve. You cannot simply close both doors and wait out the night, because you'll run out of power long before 6 a.m. arrives. You cannot constantly monitor the cameras, because that also drains power unsustainably. You must find a rhythm, a pattern of checking cameras efficiently, closing doors only when necessary, using light sparingly to confirm positions. Every decision carries weight. Every second you keep a door closed is a second of power you're sacrificing. Every moment you don't check the cameras is a moment an animatronic could be approaching unseen. The game forces you into this agonizing balance between vigilance and conservation, between knowing what's coming and having the resources to stop it. What makes this particularly effective is how it inverts traditional horror game design. In most survival horror experiences, from Resident Evil to Silent Hill to amnesia. The core loop involves exploration. You move through environments, searching for supplies, solving puzzles, occasionally hiding or fleeing from threats. The horror comes from not knowing what's around the next corner, from choosing to open that door or descend those stairs. You are the active party, advancing through space while dangers lurk passively in the environment. Five Nights at Freddy's flips this completely. You are stationary. The threats are mobile. Instead of you hunting for monsters, the monsters hunt for you while you sit helpless, watching them approach with increasing dread. This inversion had been attempted before in games like Sit and Survive, one of Scott Cawthon's own earlier projects, but never with such polish or such perfect execution of the concept. By making the player passive in terms of movement, but active in terms of decision-making, FNAF created a unique psychological experience. The anticipation becomes unbearable. You watch Bonnie appear in the backstage area on camera feed, then switch to the West Hall to see if he's moved. He has. He's closer. You flip back to Pirate Cove to check on Foxy. The curtain is open. He's gone. Panic. You flip to the West Hall corner camera. Bonnie is right outside your door. You hit the light button. There he is, standing in the blind spot, staring at you with lifeless eyes. You slam the door. Power drains faster. You can't check the cameras with the door closed, or you'll run out of electricity before the night ends. So you sit there, in darkness, hearing sounds, wondering if Chica is approaching from the right, if Freddy is moving, if Foxy is sprinting down the hallway. The seconds crawl by. You risk opening the door. Bonnie is gone. You check the cameras again. Where are they? Where did they go? The cycle continues over and over for 6 in-game minutes that feel like an eternity. The jump scares that punctuate failure are often cited as FNAF's primary scare tactic. And while they're certainly effective, they're actually secondary to this deeper, more insidious form of terror. Yes, when an animatronic gets you, the sudden scream and flashing image make you jump. But the real fear is in the build-up, in the minutes of managing your paranoia, in the knowledge that you probably made a mistake 10 seconds ago that's going to kill you any moment now. The jump scares are the release of tension. The gameplay is the building of it. And because the game keeps you locked in place, you cannot escape that tension. You cannot run to a safe room or pause to catch your breath in gameplay terms. Only in the menu. You must sit there, making split-second decisions while your heart pounds and your hands shake, until the clock finally, unmercifully, hits 6 a.m. This simplicity also had practical benefits that contributed to FNAF's cult status. Because the game was mechanically simple and visually static in many ways, relying on pre-rendered environments and limited animations, Cawthon could develop it quickly and efficiently. This allowed for that remarkably fast release schedule in the early years. It also meant the game ran well on a wide variety of systems, from high-end gaming PCs to modest laptops, and could be easily ported to mobile devices. The iOS and Android versions of the first game launched just days after the PC release, making FNAF accessible to mobile gamers who might never have experienced it otherwise. This accessibility expanded the potential audience enormously, allowing the game to spread far beyond its initial Steam release. Moreover, the simplicity made FNAF easy to understand at a glance, which proved crucial for its success on YouTube. When Markiplier or other content creators played the game, viewers could immediately grasp what was happening. The limited UI, the clear threat, the ticking clock, all of it was legible even to someone watching rather than playing. You didn't need to understand complex inventory systems or weapon mechanics or environmental puzzles. You just needed to understand that the person playing was trapped in a room, monsters were coming, and resources were limited. This clarity of concept helped FNAF's Let's Play videos find massive audiences, including younger viewers who might have been overwhelmed by more mechanically complex horror games, but could follow and appreciate FNAF's straightforward terror. The game also benefits from what I call elegant scalability. The basic concept, surviving nights while animatronics hunt you, can be made easier or harder simply by adjusting AI aggression levels. This is why the custom night feature became so beloved. After completing the main game's 5 nights plus a 6th bonus night, players could access a custom night where they manually set the AI difficulty for each animatronic from 0 to 20. Want to practice dealing with just Foxy? Set him to 20 and everyone else to 0. Want the ultimate challenge? Set everyone to 20, creating the notorious 2020 mode that only the most skilled players could beat. This flexibility meant FNAF could accommodate players of all skill levels without fundamentally changing its mechanics. And it meant the truly dedicated could push themselves to extremes that yielded new story revelations, as beating 2020 mode revealed additional lore details. But perhaps most importantly, the simplicity created space for imagination. Because you spent most of your time staring at static cameras or sitting in darkness listening to sounds, your mind filled in the gaps. You imagined what the animatronics were doing between camera checks. You constructed narratives about their movements and motivations. The game's minimalist approach to storytelling, which we'll explore more deeply in the next section, combined with this mechanical simplicity to create an experience that felt both complete and open-ended. You were given a framework, a set of tools, and a terrifying situation. What you made of it, and how you interpreted the movements and sounds and occasional flashes of visual information, became deeply personal. 2 players experiencing the same night might describe very different emotional journeys based on when they happened to check cameras, which patterns they noticed, how their paranoia manifested. This is why FNAF became such fertile ground for theories and community discussion, despite its surface-level simplicity. The game gave you just enough information to operate, but left vast amounts unexplained, trusting players to engage actively with what they were experiencing rather than passively consuming a prescribed experience. And because the mechanics were so tightly focused, because there were no extraneous systems to distract from that core loop of monitor, check, survive, every element felt purposeful and potentially meaningful. Why do the animatronics move? Why do they target the security guard? What happened in this building to create this nightmare? The gameplay didn't answer these questions, but it asked them implicitly with every night survived, and that questioning drove players deeper into engagement with the franchise. In an era of increasing complexity in game design, where many titles equated depth with layered systems and extensive tutorials, Five Nights at Freddy's proved that sometimes the most effective approach is the simplest one. By mastering a single core mechanic, the tension between safety and power management, and executing it with precision, Cawthon created something that felt fresh despite its technical limitations. The game wasn't trying to be Resident Evil or Silent Hill, and it was charting its own path, finding terror in stasis rather than movement, in resource scarcity rather than combat, in waiting rather than acting. And in doing so, it created a template that would inspire countless imitators while remaining uniquely effective in its own execution. The simplicity wasn't a flaw to overcome. It was the entire point, a deliberate artistic choice that elevated FNAF from a good indie horror game to a revolutionary one. the lore phenomenon, and the art of mystery. If Five Nights at Freddy's had only been a clever horror game with tight mechanics, it would have enjoyed success and faded like countless others before it. But what transformed it from a hit into a phenomenon was the lore, that sprawling, intricate, deliberately obscured narrative that turned millions of players into amateur detectives. Hans Scott Cawthon understood something fundamental about human psychology. We are compelled to solve mysteries. We cannot resist a puzzle, especially one that seems just barely within reach. And by crafting a story that revealed itself in fragments, through hidden details and cryptic minigames and environmental storytelling, he created an engagement loop that lasted far beyond the few hours it took to beat the main games. The first Five Nights at Freddy's game contained surprisingly little explicit narrative. You received phone calls from a previous security guard who offered tips for survival, and those calls contained hints at something darker beneath the surface. He mentioned that the animatronics might try to stuff you into a spare suit if they caught you, thinking you were an endoskeleton without a costume. He casually referenced a bite of 87, where someone lost their frontal lobe, though that incident happened at a different location. He noted that the animatronics used to be allowed to wander during the day, but weren't anymore. These breadcrumbs painted a picture of a troubled history, of incidents and accidents that had led to the current state of affairs, but they didn't form a complete narrative. What they did instead was create questions. What was the bite of 87? Why would the animatronics think a human was an endoskeleton? What happened to the previous security guards? As players dug deeper, exploring every corner of the game, they began finding answers in unusual places. Newspapers visible in the background of certain camera feeds mentioned the disappearance of 5 children at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, linked to a man in a mascot suit who lured them away. Posters on the walls showed the animatronics in different states, sometimes with eyes that seemed to follow you, sometimes with the message, "It's me," scrawled across them. Rare screens that appeared when you died showed what looked like eyeballs and teeth inside animatronic suits, suggesting human remains stuffed into the costumes. And on very specific nights, playing in very specific ways, you could encounter Golden Freddy, a mysterious 5th animatronic that appeared as a slumped, discolored version of Freddy Fazbear, whose appearance crashed the game when triggered. This hidden layer of storytelling rewarded careful observation and experimentation. Players began compiling what they found, sharing screenshots and theories on Reddit and YouTube. Matt Pat, whose channel The Game Theorist had been building an audience by analyzing the hidden meaning in video games, created an early video about FNAF's lore that attracted millions of views. His analysis connected the newspaper clippings about missing children to the aggressive behavior of the animatronics, suggesting that the robots were possessed by the souls of murdered kids. This wasn't explicitly stated in the game, but the evidence supported it. The animatronics moved with purpose and aggression that went beyond programming. The hidden imagery showed organic material in the suits. The whole situation felt personal, vengeful, like these machines had reasons beyond malfunction for wanting to kill night guards. When Five Nights at Freddy's 2 released just 3 months later, it didn't provide straightforward answers to these mysteries. Instead, it deepened them exponentially. The game was a prequel, set in 1987, introducing new toy animatronics with facial recognition software designed to protect children. But something went wrong. The phone guy in this game mentioned someone using an old yellow suit, Spring Bonnie, from the back room, leading to an incident. Minigames between nights showed pixelated scenarios, including one called Give Gifts, Give Life, where a puppet animatronic placed masks on 4 dead children, seemingly bringing them to life in the bodies of the animatronics. Another minigame called Take Cake to the Children showed a child being murdered outside the building, while a Fredbear animatronic served cake inside, unable to help. These weren't just gameplay challenges. They were pieces of a timeline and of a history that players needed to assemble. The genius of Cawthon's approach was in maintaining ambiguity while providing just enough structure for theorizing. He never confirmed theories directly, at least not initially, but he would occasionally comment on Reddit or his website when a theorist got something particularly right, offering cryptic validation without giving away the whole picture. This created a collaborative relationship between creator and community. Players weren't just consuming content. They were actively constructing the narrative through collective analysis and debate. Every new game added more pieces to the puzzle, sometimes answering old questions, but always raising new ones. Who was the purple man shown killing children in the minigames? And what was the connection between Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza? Why did certain animatronics behave differently? What did the Bite of 87 really involve? This mystery-driven approach had several effects that contributed to FNAF's cult status. First, it created incredible replayability. You didn't just beat a FNAF game once and move on. You played it repeatedly, searching for secrets, trying to trigger rare events, analyzing every screen and sound for hidden meaning. Second, it made the franchise feel vast and important beyond its actual content. Each game could be completed in a few hours, but the lore could be discussed for months, years even, as new evidence emerged and old theories were revised. Third, it gave content creators endless material. YouTubers could make theory videos, lore compilations, and timeline analyses, reaction content to other people's theories, and deep dives into specific mysteries. MatPat's FNAF playlist eventually grew to 95 videos spanning hundreds of hours of content, all based on games that took maybe 20 hours total to play through. The ratio of discussion to gameplay was astronomical, and that discussion kept FNAF relevant long after the initial scares wore off. Fourth, and perhaps most crucially, the mystery democratized the experience. You didn't need to be good at horror games to engage with FNAF lore. You could watch Let's Plays, read wikis, participate in forum discussions, and feel like a meaningful part of the community. The gatekeeping that existed in many gaming communities, where skill determined belonging, didn't apply here. If you cared about solving the puzzle, you were welcome. And this opened FNAF to audiences who might never have played the games themselves, but became deeply invested in the story. Younger fans who couldn't afford the games or were too scared to play could experience FNAF through YouTube, consuming both gameplay and theory content, then joining discussions about what it all meant. This accessibility, combined with the compelling nature of the mystery itself, created a fan base that transcended traditional gaming demographics. The lore also benefited from Cawthon's willingness to expand beyond games. He co-authored a novel series beginning with The Silver Eyes in 2015, which provided alternate universe takes on certain events and characters, offering new perspectives without invalidating game canon. The Fazbear Frights Anthology collection began in 2019, presenting short stories that explored themes and concepts from the games through different lenses. These books served dual purposes. They gave fans more content to consume between game releases, and they introduced FNAF to readers who might discover the franchise through bookstores rather than gaming platforms. the stories often contradicted or diverged from game canon, which Cawthon acknowledged, suggesting they should be read as parallel interpretations rather than definitive answers. This approach kept the core mystery intact while providing supplemental material that enriched the overall mythology. What's fascinating is how the lore evolved over time to accommodate both continuation and reinvention. After the fourth game, which many expected to be the series finale based on its subtitle, The Final Chapter, Cawthon continued with Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, and Beyond, each adding new layers. Sister Location introduced the Funtime animatronics and explored the underground facility where they were kept, revealing William Afton's experiments with a substance called Remnant that could bind souls to metal. Pizzeria Simulator brought the story full circle, with Henry Emily, Afton's old business partner, orchestrating a final fire to free the trapped souls and condemn Afton to torment. Ultimate Custom Night suggested Afton was being punished in a purgatory-like state by one of his victims. Help Wanted introduced Glitch Trap, a digital manifestation of Afton's consciousness, extending the horror into virtual reality. Security Breach moved the franchise into a modern mall-like mega-complex, showing how the legacy of Fazbear Entertainment persisted decades after the original tragedies. Each expansion could have broken the lore, made it too convoluted to follow. But Cawthon and later co-developers like Steel Wool Studios managed to maintain coherence through careful attention to continuity and by embracing the community's role in piecing things together. When FNAF lore seemed hopelessly tangled, dedicated fans would create comprehensive timelines, visual guides, and explanatory videos that helped others keep up. These community resources became essential to the franchise, serving as living documents that updated with each new release. The wikis, maintained by volunteers, contained more information than any official source, cataloging every detail, every theory, every confirmed fact and disputed interpretation. The lore also created a unique relationship between past and present. Because the games were told non-chronologically, with prequels and sequels released in seemingly random order, understanding the full story required engaging with the entire franchise. You couldn't just play the latest entry and know what was happening. You needed context from earlier games, from mini-games and books and hidden screens scattered across 10 years of releases. This created a barrier to entry that would normally hurt a franchise, but FNAF's community solved that problem through endless explanation and welcome. New fans asking, "Where do I start?" would receive detailed responses, often directing them to comprehensive lore videos that caught them up. The community wanted to share this mystery, to bring others into the fold, and because solving it together was part of the appeal. It's worth noting that not everyone appreciated this approach. Some critics argued that FNAF's lore was deliberately obtuse, that Cawthon was making things complicated for the sake of complexity, rather than serving a clear narrative vision. Others suggested that the story had been retroactively constructed, that early games didn't have all these layers, and Cawthon added them later to capitalize on the theory craze. These criticisms have merit in some respects. The lore did grow more complex over time, and certain elements were clearly developed in response to community theories. But whether that diminishes the achievement is debatable. Storytelling that evolves in response to its audience, that treats them as collaborators rather than passive consumers, represents a distinctly modern approach enabled by internet culture and rapid release cycles. FNAF's lore wasn't crafted in isolation and then presented as finished. It was constructed in dialogue with millions of players, shaped by their observations and enthusiasm, refined through years of iteration. This collaborative mystery solving became one of FNAF's defining features, setting it apart from franchises with more traditional narrative delivery. When you played a Resident Evil game, the story unfolded through cutscenes and documents that explicitly told you what happened. When you played FNAF, you had to work for understanding, and that work created investment. The franchise respected its audience enough to believe they would put in that effort, and the audience responded by creating one of the most extensive fan-driven analytical ecosystems in gaming history. Every frame of every minigame was scrutinized. Every line of dialogue was parsed for hidden meaning. Every environmental detail became potential evidence. And through this collective effort, a coherent, albeit complex narrative emerged about tragedy, obsession, revenge, and the supernatural consequences of trying to cheat death. The mystery wasn't just a marketing gimmick. It was the heart of what made FNAF special, the reason it transcended its mechanical simplicity and became a cultural touchstone. By refusing to explain everything, by trusting players to engage deeply and think critically, Scott Cawthon created a story that felt alive, that grew and changed with each discovery, and that belonged as much to the community as to its creator. And in doing so, he demonstrated that sometimes the most compelling narratives are the ones we have to assemble ourselves, piece by piece, mystery by mystery, until suddenly we're looking at something much larger and more meaningful than we ever expected to find in a simple indie horror game about haunted animatronics, community-driven storytelling, and the YouTube phenomenon. The rise of Five Nights at Freddy's cannot be separated from the rise of gaming content on YouTube, and more specifically, the explosion of Let's Play videos in the early to mid-2010s. This was a unique moment in internet culture when platforms like YouTube, Twitch, and similar services were transitioning from hobby spaces to professional careers for content creators, and gaming channels had existed for years, but they were gaining unprecedented mainstream traction, with creators building audiences that rivaled traditional media. And Five Nights at Freddy's, whether by design or fortunate timing, was perfectly positioned to ride this wave. When Markiplier uploaded his first FNAF video on August 13, 2014, just 5 days after the game's Desera release, he couldn't have known he was documenting what would become a symbiotic relationship between game and creator. Mark Fishbach, known online as Markiplier, had been building his channel since 2012, focusing primarily on indie horror games and Let's Plays of titles like Amnesia, The Dark Descent. His approach combined genuine reactions to scares with an affable, almost Big Brother personality that made his content accessible and entertaining. When he encountered FNAF, the game's simple mechanics and intense jump scares proved ideal for his format. Viewers could easily understand what was happening while enjoying his escalating panic as animatronics closed in. That first video, titled "Warning, Scariest Game in Years," immediately captured the game's appeal. Markiplier's reactions were authentic and visceral, his growing terror palpable as he struggled through that first night. The video's description sold the experience perfectly, noting that no other game had given him a greater sense of dread. This wasn't hyperbole crafted for clicks. You could hear it in his voice as he checked cameras with mounting anxiety, as he fumbled with door controls while Bonnie lurked just outside, as jump scares made him literally scream into his microphone. And viewers, drawn by the promised terror, watched in massive numbers. As of recent counts, that video has accumulated over 114 million views. making it his most watched Let's Play ever, and one of the most viewed gaming videos on the entire platform. But Markiplier was just one piece of a much larger phenomenon. PewDiePie, then the most subscribed individual creator on YouTube, also played FNAF early in its release, introducing the game to his enormous audience. Jacksepticeye covered it extensively. Smaller creators like Razbowski, Dolko, Fusions Gamer, and countless others built significant portions of their channels around FNAF content. The game became one of the most uploaded titles on YouTube in 2015, and with new videos appearing constantly as creators tried to capitalize on its popularity. This created a feedback loop where more content meant more visibility, which meant more players discovering the game, which meant more content creators covering it to meet audience demand. What made FNAF particularly well suited to this format was its performance potential. The game's structure, with its night-by-night progression and clear win-lose states, created natural narrative arcs for videos. A creator could document their entire attempt at beating Night 5, building tension as they got closer to 6 a.m., celebrating victory or accepting defeat with audience participation through comments. The jump scares provided obvious highlights, moments that could be clipped and shared, reactions that became memes, and because each night only lasted several minutes in real time, it was easy to edit multiple attempts into a single engaging video without excessive padding or dead air. Moreover, FNAF's difficulty curve meant creators could demonstrate genuine skill progression. Early videos showed fumbling confusion, desperate attempts to survive the first night. Later videos showed mastery, confident camera checking and power management, successful completions of increasingly difficult custom night challenges. This gave long-term FNAF content a sense of journey, of growth that audiences could follow and celebrate. When Dalko became only the second person to beat Ultimate Custom Night's brutal 50-20 mode, where all 50 characters were set to maximum aggression, as it was a genuine achievement that his audience had watched him work toward through dozens of hours of attempts. The same applied to other creators pushing themselves to complete challenges, speedruns, or self-imposed difficulty modifications. But perhaps more influential than the gameplay content was the theory content, and no creator was more synonymous with FNAF theories than Matthew Patrick, known as Matt Pat, creator of the Game Theorist channel. Matt Pat had been making videos analyzing video game lore and hidden details since 2011, but FNAF provided him with unprecedented material. His first FNAF theory video, released shortly after the game's debut, connected the newspaper clippings about missing children to the animatronics' behavior, proposing that the mascots were haunted by murdered kids seeking revenge. The video was meticulously researched, presenting evidence from the game in a compelling, accessible format that made even casual viewers feel like they were uncovering secrets. That first video was just the beginning. As more FNAF games released, each adding layers to the lore, MatPat created video after video dissecting every detail. His FNAF playlist eventually grew to 95 videos, exploring everything from the identity of the killer to the significance of Fredbear's family diner, from the timeline of events to the meaning of cryptic minigames. These videos often garnered tens of millions of views each, with some becoming among the most popular content on his channel. MatPat's influence became so significant that Scott Cawthon himself acknowledged watching the theories and occasionally offering cryptic confirmation when MatPat got something particularly right. Cawthon even gave MatPat cameo roles in games like Freddy in Space 2 and the 2023 movie, recognizing his contribution to the franchise's success. What MatPat did that elevated FNAF beyond simple horror was provide a framework for intellectual engagement. His videos weren't just recaps of spooky moments. They were analytical essays, treating the games as texts worthy of serious study. He walked viewers through evidence, constructed arguments, acknowledged counter-theories, and built comprehensive narratives from scattered pieces. This transformed FNAF consumption from passive entertainment into active investigation. Viewers watching MatPat's videos felt like they were learning, discovering, solving puzzles alongside him. And crucially, they didn't need to agree with his conclusions to enjoy the process. Many of his theories sparked debates in comments and on forums, with other creators and their fans proposing alternatives, building on his work, or challenging his interpretations. This created a thriving ecosystem of FNAF content that extended far beyond simple Let's Plays. Animation channels created FNAF-inspired stories and music videos. Musicians like the Living Tombstone wrote songs about the lore, with tracks like Five Nights at Freddy's One Song, accumulating 370 million views and eventually being featured in the movie's credits. Artists drew fan art depicting the characters, often reimagining them in different styles, or creating original characters within the FNAF universe. Our writers crafted fan fiction, exploring scenarios and relationships between characters. Voice actors created audio dramas and comic dubs. Game developers made fan games expanding on FNAF's concepts, with some like Five Nights at Candy's and One Night at Flumpty's, eventually getting official support from Cawthon and commercial releases. This explosion of fan-created content served multiple purposes in FNAF's cult status development. First, it kept the franchise constantly visible. Even during gaps between official game releases, new fan content appeared daily, ensuring FNAF never left the cultural conversation for long. Second, it lowered barriers to entry. Someone curious about FNAF could find content at any level of engagement, from simple animation memes to deep lore analyses to creative reinterpretations. Third, it demonstrated the franchise's flexibility. FNAF's core concepts, haunted animatronics, tragic backstories, survival horror, were broad enough to support infinite variation while remaining recognizable. Fourth, it created opportunities for community participation at all skill levels. You didn't need to be a professional animator or musician or game developer to contribute something meaningful. Fan art could be elaborate or simple. Fan theories could be comprehensive or focused on single details. Everyone could be part of the conversation. The community also developed its own culture, its own internal references and jokes. Sayings like "It's me" from the posters became memes. The debate over whether Foxy was a good guy became a running gag. The various interpretations of the bite of 87 spawned endless speculation, and eventually became a joke itself when FNAF4 showed the bite of 83 instead. Springtrap's appearance in FNAF3 generated discussions about how William Afton, the killer, ended up trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit. Phone Guy's death in the first game was analyzed frame by frame to determine which animatronic killed him. These shared reference points created a sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than individual experience. YouTube's algorithm and recommendation system amplified all of this dramatically. When someone watched a Markiplier FNAF video, they'd be recommended MatPat's theories, which would lead to other creators' content, which would surface fan animations, which would introduce music videos, creating rabbit holes that could consume hours or days of viewing. The platform's structure encouraged this kind of obsessive engagement, and FNAF's interconnected lore rewarded it. You could start by watching a simple playthrough and end up 3 hours later having consumed a comprehensive education in FNAF's entire timeline. Then jump into comment sections to debate specific details with other fans. This YouTube phenomenon also made FNAF accessible to audiences who might never have played the games. Horror games carry inherent barriers. They require purchasing, often on PC, which not everyone has. They can be too scary for younger or more sensitive viewers to play themselves. They demand time and skill to complete. But FNAF YouTube content removed all these barriers. You could experience the entire franchise vicariously, watching skilled or entertaining creators navigate the challenges while you enjoyed from safety. This vicarious experience was legitimate engagement, not somehow lesser than playing. In fact, for many fans, especially younger ones, watching FNAF was the primary mode of consumption, with playing being secondary or non-existent. The data supports this. FNAF became a phenomenon among Gen Z viewers, particularly those in middle school and high school when the games released. According to various analyses, a significant portion of the fan base discovered FNAF through YouTube rather than Steam or mobile app stores. They watched because their favorite creators played, because their friends talked about it at school, because the algorithms suggested it, because the mysteries compelled them. And they stayed because the community welcomed them, because new content kept coming, because there was always more to discover. This community-driven approach to storytelling, where creators and fans collectively built the narrative through analysis and creativity, represented something relatively new in gaming. Sure, other franchises had active fan communities and theory cultures, but FNAF's combination of approachable horror, cryptic lore, rapid release schedule, and perfect timing with YouTube's golden age of gaming content created a perfect storm. The franchise became as much about the community around it as the games themselves, and that community took ownership in ways that ensured FNAF's longevity far beyond what typical game cycles would suggest. Even now, over a decade after that first game, FNAF content continues to thrive on YouTube, and creators still make theories about new releases. Fans still debate timeline details. New generations discover the franchise through the same recommendation algorithms that powered its initial success. And that community, built video by video, theory by theory, piece of fan art by piece of fan art, remains one of FNAF's greatest achievements. It proved that with the right game at the right time, internet culture could transform a solo developer's project into a collaborative phenomenon, where millions of people felt not just like consumers, but like participants in something meaningful, something worth investing time and passion into understanding and celebrating. Scott Cawthon's vision and creative control. Behind every element that made Five Nights at Freddy's special, there was a singular creative vision. Scott Cawthon's role in the franchise's success cannot be overstated, not just as the original creator, but as the guiding force who maintained remarkable control over FNAF's direction, even as it grew beyond anything he could have imagined. His decisions, his instincts, his willingness to take risks and listen to his community while staying true to his creative vision. All of these factors contributed to FNAF achieving cult classic status, rather than fading like so many indie horror games before it. Cawthon's background in Christian game development and animation, while commercially unsuccessful, had given him skills that proved invaluable. He understood 3D modeling and rendering from his work on games like The Pilgrim's Progress and The Desolate Hope. He knew how to work within limitations, he having spent years creating projects on minimal budgets. He had experience with storytelling, crafting narratives that conveyed meaning beyond simple gameplay. And crucially, he had learned resilience through failure, developing the mental fortitude to keep creating even when success seemed impossible. All of this came together in FNAF, where his technical abilities allowed him to create professional-looking assets despite working alone. His narrative skills enabled the cryptic lore that captivated millions, and his persistence drove him to release game after game at a pace that kept the franchise constantly relevant. One of Cawthon's most important decisions was maintaining creative control, even as FNAF's commercial potential became obvious. When Warner Bros. Pictures announced plans for a movie adaptation in 2015, just a year after the first game's release, Cawthon was involved from the beginning as co-writer and producer. As development dragged on, with directors coming and going and scripts being rewritten repeatedly, Cawthon reportedly held firm on what the movie needed to be, even when it meant delays and setbacks. He wanted the film to satisfy fans, to respect the lore, to capture what made FNAF special, rather than being a generic horror movie using FNAF branding. When the project eventually moved to Blumhouse Productions in 2017, Cawthon remained actively involved, co-writing the final screenplay and maintaining influence over key creative decisions. This protectiveness extended to the games themselves. When FNAF World, his attempt at a lighter, RPG-style spin-off, are released in January 2016 to mixed reviews due to glitches and issues, Cawthon didn't just patch it. He pulled the game entirely from Steam within 4 days, apologized publicly to fans, and released a heavily revised version for free on GameJolt. This willingness to admit mistakes and prioritize quality over profit demonstrated respect for his audience that many corporate-driven franchises lack. Similarly, when he attempted to create Ultimate Custom Night as a definitive ending, he listened to feedback about difficulty balance and accessibility, implementing changes based on community response. Cawthon's engagement with the community was consistently thoughtful and measured. He maintained presence on Reddit, his website, and Steam forums, occasionally offering hints or confirmations about lore without spoiling mysteries. On when MatPat or other theorists got close to correct interpretations, Cawthon would sometimes acknowledge it cryptically, validating their efforts without making theory crafting obsolete. When fan games impressed him with their creativity and polish, he eventually established a program to help fund and publish them officially, bringing titles like The Joy of Creation and One Night at Flumpty's under his umbrella, while letting their creators maintain artistic control. This generosity toward fan developers showed appreciation for the community that had supported him and recognized that FNAF's success belonged partly to everyone who had engaged with it. His rapid release schedule in the early years, while controversial among some developers who felt it set unrealistic expectations, came from genuine passion rather than cynical exploitation. And Cawthon was creating these games in compressed timeframes because he was genuinely excited about each new idea, each addition to the lore. He wasn't padding releases with DLC or microtransactions. He was delivering complete experiences at reasonable prices, often following up free updates that added substantial content. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 received a significant Halloween update at no cost. Sister Location got a custom night edition with new challenges and story elements. Pizzeria Simulator, which appeared to be a tycoon game, was actually a full FNAF entry given away completely free. This generosity built tremendous goodwill and demonstrated that Cawthon viewed his relationship with fans as collaborative rather than transactional. The lore itself reflects Cawthon's particular creative sensibilities, blending horror with tragedy, and exploring themes of loss, revenge, obsession, and the consequences of trying to resurrect the dead. William Afton's character, the killer who becomes Springtrap and later a digital ghost as Glitchtrap, embodies classic horror tropes while feeling distinctly FNAF. His murders stemmed from twisted experiments with Remnant, seeking immortality for his family, creating layers of motivation beyond simple evil. Henry Emily, the other founder of Fazbear Entertainment, carries guilt and determination, ultimately sacrificing himself to free the trapped souls and end the nightmare. The children, murdered and possessing animatronics, are portrayed with sympathy, trapped victims seeking release rather than mindless monsters. These characters and their arcs show care in development, and turning what could have been simple jump-scare delivery systems into a tragic story about broken people and innocent victims caught in cycles of violence and supernatural horror. Cawthon's visual design choices also deserve recognition. The animatronics themselves walk a perfect line between child-friendly mascots and nightmare fuel. Freddy Fazbear could plausibly exist in a real pizzeria, his brown fur and top hat evoking classic entertainment robots. But his dead eyes, his uncanny proportions, his jerky movements all create profound unease. Bonnie's purple fur and red bow tie seem innocent until you notice his blank stare and the way he tilts his head when approaching. Chica's cupcake companion adds whimsy that makes her presence even more disturbing. Foxy's damaged state, with his exposed endoskeleton and tattered costume, and it makes him look like he's falling apart, adding to his terrifying sprinting attacks. These designs are iconic now, instantly recognizable, spawning countless merchandise and cosplay. They succeeded because Cawthon understood how to tap into primal fears about things that look almost human, but aren't quite right. The soundscape he created was equally effective. Cawthon composed or selected sounds that enhanced tension without overwhelming gameplay. The deep, droning background noise that plays during nights creates ambience. The distant laughter of children or Freddy's music box melody hint at the building's dark past. The footsteps of approaching animatronics let you know danger is near even when you can't see it. The kitchen audio in FNAF1, where you hear Chica moving around but can't see her, forces you to imagine what she's doing. The jump scare screams are pitched perfectly to make you physically jump. Phone Guy's voice, cheerful and informative despite the horror he's describing, creates cognitive dissonance that adds to the unease. Every audio element serves a purpose, contributing to the atmosphere without distracting from the core gameplay. Perhaps most impressively, Cawthon knew when to step back. As the franchise grew and demands increased, he partnered with Steel Wool Studios for games like Help Wanted, Special Delivery, and Security Breach, letting experienced teams handle aspects like VR development and 3D exploration that were outside his usual expertise. He co-wrote books with authors like Kira Breed Risley, recognizing that expanding into literature benefited from collaborative storytelling. For the movie, he trusted director Emma Tammy and Blumhouse, while maintaining involvement as co-writer and producer. These partnerships allowed FNAF to grow beyond what Cawthon could create alone, while ensuring his vision remained central. His retirement announcement in June 2021, prompted by controversy over political donations and a desire to focus on family, marked a significant transition. Cawthon had become a lightning rod for debates about creators' personal beliefs versus their work's value. and he chose to step away from public-facing development rather than let those debates overshadow the franchise. In his retirement statement, he emphasized that FNAF would continue in capable hands, that he had trained successors and established processes to maintain quality. This graceful exit, prioritizing the franchise's future over his own ego, demonstrated maturity rare in creators who've experienced his level of success. Looking at FNAF's development arc, from desperate last attempt to multimedia empire, Cawthon's fingerprints are on every successful element: the accessible horror, the cryptic lore, the rapid iteration, the community engagement, the creative risks, the quality standards, all flowed from his vision and values. He treated his audience with respect, creating genuine horror experiences at fair prices, while building a story complex enough to sustain years of analysis. He viewed fan contributions as collaborations rather than threats, supporting and celebrating community creativity. He prioritized story and atmosphere over graphics and spectacle, proving that you don't need AAA budgets to create something culturally significant. In many ways, Cawthon represents the ideal indie developer, someone who succeeded by staying true to their vision while remaining humble and responsive to their community. His journey from struggling Christian game developer to internationally recognized creator is inspiring, not because of the money or fame, but because of how he handled that success. He didn't sell out or compromise his values. He didn't exploit his audience with predatory monetization. He didn't let success make him arrogant or disconnected. He created, he listened, he adapted, and he built something that millions found meaningful. And when it was time to pass the torch, he did so with grace, ensuring FNAF's legacy would continue beyond his direct involvement. That combination of creative talent, business acumen, ethical practice, and personal humility is why Scott Cawthon deserves recognition not just as FNAF's creator, but as a model for how indie developers can build lasting franchises without losing their soul in the process. Cultural impact and mainstream recognition. By 2015, less than a year after the first game's release, Five Nights at Freddy's had transcended gaming to become a genuine cultural phenomenon. The franchise appeared on mainstream news segments, often framed through parental concern about children watching scary content on YouTube, but the coverage itself validated FNAF's reach. It wasn't just gamers who knew about Freddy Fazbear and his haunted pizzeria. Parents knew because their kids wouldn't stop talking about it, and teachers knew because students drew FNAF characters in notebooks. Retailers knew because merchandise flew off shelves. The franchise had broken through into general awareness in ways that few indie games ever achieve. This mainstream recognition manifested in various forms. Funko, the company famous for their pop vinyl figures, signed a master licensing deal with FNAF in 2016, proceeding to release over 80 different figures based on characters from across the franchise. These weren't obscure collectibles found only in specialty shops. They appeared in major retailers like Walmart, Target, GameStop, and Hot Topic, sitting on shelves alongside figures from Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and other massive franchises. The fact that FNAF warranted this level of merchandise production and distribution signaled its commercial importance. By 2024, when Jaguarez took over the master license from Funko, FNAF had become one of the company's biggest IPs in terms of revenue, demonstrating sustained commercial viability far beyond initial hype. The merchandise expansion went beyond Funko Pops. Plushies of the animatronics, from cute versions to twisted nightmare variants, sold in stores and online. action figures with articulation and accessories appealed to collectors. Board games adapted FNAF's mechanics into tabletop experiences. Clothing lines featured animatronic designs and franchise logos. Halloween costumes let kids dress as their favorite characters, which created an odd scenario where children were trick-or-treating as the very animatronics that had terrified them or their older siblings. Backpacks, lunchboxes, posters, keychains, phone cases. The breadth of FNAF merchandise rivaled that of franchises decades older with much larger media presences. This commercial success reflected genuine demand. FNAF fans wanted to own physical pieces of the franchise, to display their affiliation and show support. The merchandise served as conversation starters, ways to identify fellow fans in public spaces. Wearing a FNAF t-shirt or carrying a Freddy Fazbear keychain signaled membership in a community, inviting connections with others who recognized the references. This kind of visible fandom, where people proudly displayed their enthusiasm, is hallmark behavior for cult classics. FNAF had inspired the same devotion usually reserved for long-established properties. The franchise's cultural penetration was perhaps most evident in how it influenced language and memes. The phrase "it's me" from the ominous posters in the first game became shorthand in online spaces. Springtrap, the name given to William Afton's corpse trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit, entered the vocabulary of horror gaming. The man behind the slaughter became a meme associated with Afton, often accompanied by purple-themed imagery referencing his appearance in minigames. Was that the bite of 87? Became a catchphrase, simultaneously referencing FNAF lore and mocking how obsessively fans analyzed every detail. These linguistic elements spread beyond FNAF-specific spaces, appearing in general gaming discussions, meme communities, and even mainstream social media. The franchise also demonstrated staying power uncommon for indie games. Most indie horror titles, even successful ones, follow a predictable arc. They release, generate buzz, maybe get a sequel or two, then fade as new games capture attention. FNAF defied this pattern, remaining culturally relevant from 2014 through the present day. Each new game release generated waves of content and discussion. The books maintained interest between game launches. The movie adaptation, when it finally arrived in October 2023, became Blumhouse's highest-grossing film ever at nearly $300 million worldwide, proving that FNAF's appeal extended far beyond its gaming origins. The movie's success deserves particular attention because it validated FNAF's mainstream potential in a medium where video game adaptations historically struggled. Films based on games often failed critically and commercially, unable to translate interactive experiences into compelling cinema. FNAF faced additional challenges. Its gameplay was largely static, without the action sequences that typically drive horror movies. Its lore was complex and potentially confusing to general audiences. It had a dedicated fan base whose expectations would be difficult to satisfy, and it released simultaneously on Peacock's streaming service, potentially cannibalizing theatrical revenue. Despite all this, the movie succeeded spectacularly. It opened with $80 million domestically and $132 million globally, setting records for horror films, video game adaptations, and simultaneous streaming releases. These numbers became even more impressive considering critical reception was mixed, with Rotten Tomatoes critics scoring it at 33%, while audiences gave it strong approval ratings, with CinemaScore reporting an A- grade. This disconnect between professional critics and general audiences is classic cult phenomenon behavior. The people who mattered, the fans and curious newcomers, loved what they saw enough to drive massive ticket sales and break Peacock viewing records. The movie's impact rippled through pop culture. It introduced FNAF to audiences who had never played the games, expanding the franchise's reach into demographics that might not game, but would watch a horror film. It featured cameos from YouTubers like Korix Kenshin and MatPat, acknowledging the community that helped build FNAF's success and making those creators part of official canon. The soundtrack included the Living Tombstone's viral FNAF song, bringing together fan creation and official product. Even small details, like MatPat's cameo being revealed by fellow YouTubers as the waiter character, became news within the community, generating additional buzz and making fans feel seen and valued. The sequel was released in December 2025, continuing the franchise's box office success. The fact that Universal and Blumhouse greenlit a sequel so quickly after the first film demonstrated their belief that FNAF wasn't a one-time success, but a sustainable franchise. They saw the same thing that merchandise companies, publishers, and platform holders had already recognized. FNAF had achieved something rare. It had built an audience that would support it across multiple media over extended time periods. The exact definition of a cult classic with mainstream appeal. Beyond commercial metrics, FNAF influenced how horror games were made and marketed, and the success of its simple mechanics and emphasis on atmosphere over graphics encouraged other indie developers to focus on core experience rather than production values. Games like Bendy and the Ink Machine, Hello Neighbor, Poppy Playtime, and others adopted similar strategies, creating horror experiences with distinctive art styles and mysterious lore designed to inspire YouTube content and community theorizing. Some called this mascot horror, a subgenre characterized by turning cheerful characters sinister and building complex backstories revealed through environmental storytelling and hidden secrets. This influence extended to how developers interacted with their communities. FNAF demonstrated the value of cultivating relationships with content creators, engaging with fan theories, and treating your audience as collaborators in building narrative. Developers increasingly recognized YouTubers as crucial marketing partners whose authentic reactions could sell games more effectively than traditional advertising. The theory culture FNAF popularized led to other games, both indie and AAA, hiding similar secrets and encouraging speculation, understanding that mystery drove engagement more effectively than straightforward exposition. Educational discussions about FNAF also emerged in unexpected places. Academic analyses of its storytelling techniques appeared in game design discussions. Studies on parasocial relationships and internet fandom culture used FNAF communities as case studies. The franchise became a reference point in conversations about horror aesthetics, childhood trauma in fiction, and the evolution of indie gaming. This scholarly attention, while perhaps excessive for what began as a simple horror game, reflected FNAF's genuine cultural impact. It had become significant enough to warrant serious analysis, to be considered alongside established properties when discussing media phenomena. The longevity of FNAF's cultural presence is perhaps its most impressive achievement. We're now over a decade removed from that first game, yet the franchise remains active and relevant. New games continue to release. The movie sequel has arrived to continued commercial success. Merchandise still sells. Content creators still make videos. Communities still debate lore. new generations continue discovering FNAF through the same recommendation algorithms and word of mouth that powered its initial growth. This sustained relevance across changing internet landscapes and gaming trends demonstrates that FNAF wasn't a flash-in-the-pan viral sensation, but something with genuine staying power, the kind of legacy that defines true cult classics. The multimedia empire and expanding horizons. As Five Nights at Freddy's established itself within gaming culture, Scott Cawthon and his partners began expanding into other media, transforming a game franchise into a multimedia empire. These expansions weren't mere cash grabs slapping the FNAF name on random products. They were thoughtful extensions that explored different aspects of the lore, reached new audiences, and demonstrated the franchise's flexibility across formats. The success of these ventures further cemented FNAF's status as a cultural phenomenon, rather than just a gaming property. The novel series, beginning with The Silver Eyes in December 2015, marked FNAF's first major expansion beyond interactive media. Co-written by Scott Cawthon and author Kira Breed-Risley, the book presented an alternate universe take on familiar characters and locations. Charlie, revealed to be Henry Emily's daughter, returns to her hometown where Freddy Fazbear's Pizza once stood, uncovering dark secrets about the animatronics and the murders that haunted the establishment. The novel didn't retell game events, but rather explored similar themes and concepts through a different lens, allowing Cawthon to tell stories that didn't fit the game format while maintaining connection to core lore. The Silver Eyes was followed by The Twisted Ones in 2017 and The Fourth Closet in 2018, completing a trilogy that delved deeper into topics like Remnant, advanced animatronic technology, and the lasting effects of William Afton's crimes. These books succeeded commercially, appearing on New York Times bestseller lists and introducing a FNAF to bookstore audiences who might never browse Steam's horror section. They also provided content for fans to consume between game releases, keeping FNAF in public consciousness during gaps that might otherwise have cooled enthusiasm. The Fazbear Frights Anthology series, launched in 2019, took a different approach. Rather than following continuous narrative, these short story collections presented standalone tales set in the FNAF universe, exploring what-if scenarios and showcasing how FNAF concepts could generate diverse horror experiences. Stories like Into the Pit, and where a boy discovers a ball pit that acts as a portal to the 1985 murders, or Count the Ways, where Funtime Freddy holds a girl captive and offers her macabre choices about how to die, demonstrated the franchise's narrative versatility. Some stories connected to game lore in meaningful ways, while others simply used FNAF's world as a setting for original horror. By the time Fazbear Frights concluded with its 12th volume in April 2022, the series had sold hundreds of thousands of copies and established FNAF as a legitimate presence in young adult horror fiction. The tales from the Pizzaplex series, which began in 2022, continued this tradition with new stories set around the security breach era, further expanding the literary side of the franchise in graphic novel adaptations of both the trilogy and Fazbear Frights, brought these stories to visual format, appealing to readers who preferred illustrated narratives. The books served multiple purposes in FNAF's multimedia strategy. They provided answers to questions that games left ambiguous, though often in ways that raised new questions. They kept the franchise relevant for fans who had exhausted game content. They reached demographics that gaming alone wouldn't capture, including reluctant readers drawn in by franchise loyalty and horror enthusiasts browsing bookstore shelves. and they demonstrated that FNAF's appeal wasn't limited to jump scares and survival mechanics. The stories worked in prose, proving that the characters, lore, and concepts had value beyond their original medium. The board game and card game adaptations took FNAF in yet another direction. These tabletop experiences translated the franchise's tension and strategy into social, turn-based formats. Rather than solitary encounters with haunted animatronics, players now competed or cooperated with friends around a table, using FNAF-themed mechanics to achieve objectives while managing threats. These games introduced the franchise to audiences who preferred physical gaming, expanded FNAF's presence in hobby and toy stores, and created opportunities for in-person fandom experiences beyond conventions. The mobile game expansions beyond ports of main entries included titles like FNAFAR, Special Delivery, which used augmented reality to place animatronics in players' real-world environments through phone cameras. This technology, combined with collectible mechanics and social features, created a distinct experience that complemented rather than competed with main games. Though reception was mixed and the game eventually shut down, it demonstrated willingness to experiment with FNAF across different gaming formats. Perhaps the most ambitious expansion was into virtual reality with Help Wanted in 2019, developed by Steel Wool Studios in partnership with Cawthon. The game compiled classic FNAF experiences, updated for VR, while adding new content and advancing the lore with Glitch Trap's introduction. VR's immersive nature intensified FNAF's horror significantly, actually turning your head to check left and right doorways, physically reaching to close doors, experiencing jump scares in three-dimensional space that felt genuinely close. All of this elevated the fear factor beyond what traditional screens could achieve. Help Wanted proved that FNAF could adapt to emerging technologies while maintaining its core appeal. Security Breach, released in December 2021, represented another evolution, transforming FNAF from static horror into free roam exploration. Set in a massive mall-like facility called Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, the game let players control a child named Gregory, who must survive the night while avoiding corrupted animatronics. The shift to open environment gameplay divided fans, some appreciating the fresh approach, while others felt it diluted what made FNAF special. Regardless, Security Breach expanded FNAF's mechanical vocabulary and showed the franchise could support different gameplay styles. The multimedia expansion extended to collaboration with other properties. Dead by Daylight, an asymmetric multiplayer horror game, added a FNAF chapter in August 2024, bringing Springtrap as a playable killer character. This crossover introduced FNAF to Dead by Daylight's massive player base, while validating FNAF's status as a horror icon worthy of inclusion, alongside franchises like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Resident Evil. Similar collaborations occurred with other games and platforms, spreading FNAF's reach across gaming landscape. Music, both official and fan-created, became another crucial component. The Living Tombstone's FNAF songs accumulated hundreds of millions of views collectively, with the first song alone reaching 370 million plays on YouTube. These tracks blended catchy melodies with lore references, becoming anthems that fans sang and shared, introducing FNAF to people through music discovery rather than gaming. Other artists created their own FNAF-inspired songs, music videos, and animations, building a robust musical ecosystem around the franchise. When the Living Tombstone song appeared in the movie credits, it acknowledged this fan-created content's importance to FNAF's identity. Animation channels contributed significantly as well, creating everything from lore explanations to comedic shorts to serious dramatic reinterpretations. These animations often garnered millions of views, adding to the content ecosystem that kept FNAF constantly visible across YouTube and social media. Some animations served educational purposes, of visualizing theories and timelines to help fans understand complex lore. Others were pure entertainment, leveraging FNAF's characters for storytelling that diverged from canon while remaining recognizable and engaging. The merchandise empire already mentioned deserves further recognition for its scope and quality. Early FNAF merchandise was sometimes janky, third-party products that didn't meet quality standards. But as official licensing expanded, products improved dramatically. McFarlane Toys produced highly detailed construction sets and action figures. Funko's Pop figures became collector items, with rare exclusives commanding high prices on secondary markets. Clothing lines from companies like Hot Topic offered officially licensed apparel that fans could wear proudly. Even LEGO has been rumored to consider FNAF sets, though official confirmation remains elusive as of this writing. This merchandising success created interesting dynamics. Products intended for children based on a horror franchise raised questions about age appropriateness, though FNAF's relatively bloodless scares and PG-13 horror aesthetic made it more acceptable than ultra-violent alternatives. The merchandise also perpetuated FNAF's presence in physical retail space, ensuring that even people who never browsed gaming content encountered Freddy Fazbear's face on store shelves, in toy aisles, in bookstores, creating ambient awareness that benefited the franchise. The multimedia expansion served strategic purposes beyond revenue generation. Each new format provided opportunities to tell different stories, reach different audiences, and keep FNAF evolving rather than stagnating. Our books could explore character psychology in ways games couldn't. Movies could present cinematic spectacle impossible in indie game budgets. Board games facilitated social experiences that solo gaming couldn't replicate. Merchandise let fans display their enthusiasm in daily life. Each medium fed into others, creating a comprehensive ecosystem where discovering FNAF through any entry point could lead to engagement across multiple formats. This multimedia approach also demonstrated confidence in the property's underlying strength. Cawthon and his partners believed FNAF could succeed beyond its original context, that the characters, lore, and concepts had intrinsic value independent of jump scares and limited power mechanics. This belief proved justified. The book sold well without requiring readers to have played games. The movie attracted audiences beyond gaming demographics. The merchandise appealed to collectors who might never touch a horror title. FNAF had transcended its origins to become a broader cultural property, recognizable and valuable across contexts. Looking at the full scope of FNAF's multimedia empire in 2025, from the original game series and numerous spin-offs, from trilogy novels to anthology collections, from blockbuster movies to VR experiences, from board games to AR applications, from Funko Pops to clothing lines, from YouTube songs to convention panels, the franchise has achieved something remarkable. It's built a presence across nearly every form of entertainment and consumer product relevant to its demographic. This comprehensive saturation, achieved without losing core identity or burning out audiences, is precisely what transforms popular properties into cultural institutions, into cult classics that persist and evolve across decades rather than fading with passing trends. Lasting innovation and influence on horror gaming. Five Nights at Freddy's didn't just succeed, It changed the landscape of horror gaming in ways that continue reverberating over a decade later. To understand FNAF's innovation and influence requires examining both what it did differently and how those differences inspired subsequent developments in the genre. The franchise proved that horror games didn't need massive budgets, complex mechanics, or photorealistic graphics to terrify players and achieve commercial success. This revelation opened doors for countless developers who might have otherwise believed horror gaming was only viable for well-funded studios. The mechanical innovation of stationary horror, where the player is confined rather than exploring, created a template that many games attempted to replicate. The core loop of monitoring cameras, managing resources, and surviving until a timer expires appeared in various forms across indie horror. Titles that followed often cited FNAF as inspiration, acknowledging how it demonstrated that limitation could enhance rather than diminish horror. By removing the player's ability to flee, FNAF created inescapable tension that forced engagement with threats rather than avoiding them. This psychological intensity proved more memorable than many games with larger scopes and production values. The resource management aspect specifically, where using defensive tools consumes a limited pool that must last the entire night, became particularly influential. This mechanic forced constant trade-offs between safety and sustainability, creating meaningful decisions in every moment. Players couldn't simply close doors and feel secure. They had to calculate risk, predict animatronic movements, decide when protection was necessary versus when they could risk vulnerability to conserve power. This strategic layer elevated FNAF above simple reaction-based horror, requiring thought and planning alongside quick reflexes. FNAF also demonstrated how AI behavior patterns could create emergent horror. Each animatronic followed rules, paths through the building with certain probabilities and triggers, but those rules contained enough randomness that no two nights played identically. Bonnie might take the West Hall in one attempt and the supply closet route in another. Foxy might remain docile or become hyper-aggressive. Freddy's laughter could signal immediate danger or be a red herring. This unpredictability prevented players from memorizing solutions, ensuring each attempt felt fresh and uncertain. Other horror games adopted similar approaches, creating AI systems that followed consistent logic while maintaining surprise. The jump scare mechanic itself, while not FNAF's invention, was refined to near perfection. Cawthon understood that jump scares are most effective when they release built tension rather than appearing randomly. FNAF's scares always resulted from player failure, from mistakes in camera monitoring or power management or door closing. You knew roughly when a scare was coming, that split second when the lights went out or the animatronic appeared in your doorway, but that anticipation only heightened the terror. The sudden appearance, the piercing scream, the game over screen, all hit harder because they punctuated minutes of anxiety. Many subsequent horror games tried to recreate this effect, though few achieved FNAF's balance between anticipation and delivery. The aesthetic choices, particularly the animatronic character designs, spawned what became known as mascot horror. This subgenre features cheerful-looking characters, often associated with children's entertainment, that become sinister through corruption, malfunction, or supernatural possession. Games like Bendy and the Ink Machine with its cartoon demon, Hello Neighbor with its suspicious neighbor character, Poppy Playtime with its toy factory monsters, and numerous others followed FNAF's template of taking things designed to be friendly and making them frightening. This approach taps into childhood nostalgia and the uncanny valley effect. creating horror from the gap between expected comfort and actual threat. The lore delivery system, where story is hidden in background details, minigames, and environmental clues, rather than cutscenes or exposition, became hugely influential. Players recognized that games could tell rich stories without traditional narrative structures, that mystery and discovery could be more engaging than straightforward explanation. This approach spread beyond horror into other genres, with developers increasingly trusting audiences to piece together narratives from scattered evidence. The success of Souls-like games with their cryptic lore, hand-delivered through item descriptions and environmental storytelling, shares DNA with FNAF's approach, validating that players enjoy being challenged intellectually as well as mechanically. The relationship with content creators, particularly YouTubers, also became a model for indie horror developers. FNAF demonstrated that Let's Play videos weren't just free marketing, but could be the primary vector for commercial success. Developers began creating games specifically designed to generate entertaining content, with clear visual communication that read well on camera, moments designed to elicit reactions, and mechanics simple enough for viewers to understand while watching. This shift in design philosophy, considering how games would play for viewers not just players, fundamentally changed indie horror development. The rapid release schedule set by FNAF's early years, while unsustainable for most developers and later abandoned by Corthan himself, showed that maintaining momentum could be as important as perfection. Each new FNAF game generated waves of content and discussion that kept the franchise dominating conversation. Other developers learned that consistent output, even if individual releases were smaller or shorter, could build lasting communities more effectively than sporadic large releases that left audiences waiting years between entries. The live service model adopted by many modern games owes something to FNAF's demonstration that regular engagement beats occasional spectacle. FNAF also proved indie horror games could be commercially competitive with AAA titles. The franchise's collective revenue, accounting for game sales, merchandise, at books, movie box office, and licensing, reaches into hundreds of millions of dollars. This success demonstrated to publishers and investors that indie horror wasn't just a niche curiosity, but potentially lucrative. This recognition led to increased funding and support for indie horror projects, contributing to the genre's flourishing in recent years with titles like Little Nightmares, Amnesia sequels, and numerous others finding commercial success. The franchise's expansion into VR and AR showed willingness to embrace new technologies and platforms, encouraging other horror developers to experiment with emerging formats. Help Wanted proved VR horror could work for stationary experiences, not just exploration-based games. Special Delivery demonstrated mobile AR potential despite mixed execution. These experiments, successful or not, encouraged innovation and showed that horror could adapt to various platforms while maintaining effectiveness. FNAF's influence extends to how horror is marketed and sustained. The theory culture, the community engagement, the merchandise ecosystem, the multimedia expansion, all of these elements became templates that other franchises attempted to replicate. Developers learned that building communities around mysteries, engaging with fan theories, supporting content creators, and expanding beyond games could transform modest successes into cultural phenomena. Not every franchise that tried succeeded, but the attempt itself showed FNAF's impact on how developers think about building and maintaining horror properties. The franchise also normalized horror for younger audiences in ways that previous titles hadn't. FNAF's relatively bloodless scares, PG-13 aesthetic, and accessibility through YouTube made it acceptable for demographics that might have been barred from traditional horror. This expanded the horror gaming audience significantly, bringing in players who grew up with FNAF as their introduction to the genre, and who might later explore more mature horror titles. This gateway effect benefited the entire genre by cultivating future horror enthusiasts from younger ages. Critically, FNAF demonstrated that indie developers could compete with and even surpass AAA horror in cultural impact without matching budgets. While big-budget franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill commanded respect and sales, FNAF generated more discussion, more fan content, and more cultural penetration despite being created primarily by one person using accessible tools. This validation of indie potential encouraged countless developers to pursue their own horror visions, contributing to the diversity and creativity we see in modern horror gaming. The lasting influence appears not just in direct imitators, but in how FNAF changed expectations and possibilities. Players now expect horror games to have deeper lore worth investigating. They expect environmental storytelling and hidden secrets. They expect developers to engage with communities and acknowledge content creators. They expect merchandise and multimedia expansion for successful franchises. These expectations, normalized by FNAF's approach, have reshaped the genre in fundamental ways that benefit creators and audiences alike. Looking at modern horror gaming in 2025, FNAF's fingerprints are everywhere. The mascot horror subgenre it spawned continues producing new titles. The emphasis on mystery and community-driven storytelling it popularized remains standard practice. The model of rapid iteration and community engagement it demonstrated influences development cycles across the industry. The proof that indie horror can achieve mainstream success without compromising vision continues inspiring new developers. Five Nights at Freddy's didn't just succeed as a franchise. It changed what horror games could be, how they could be made, who could make them, and how audiences could engage with them. That kind of transformative influence, reaching far beyond the franchise itself to reshape an entire genre, is the hallmark of true innovation and one of the strongest indicators of cult classic status. The enduring legacy and why we're still talking about it. Over a decade has passed since that first night in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, since Markiplier's screams first echoed across YouTube, since players worldwide discovered they could be terrified by static cameras and limited electricity. 10 years is an eternity in gaming, long enough for entire genres to rise and fall, for technologies to emerge and become obsolete, for audiences to move on to the next viral sensation. Yet here we are in 2025, still talking about FNAF, still creating content around it, still discovering new details and debating old mysteries. This longevity demands explanation. What is it about Five Nights at Freddy's that has allowed it not just to survive, but to thrive across changing landscapes and evolving tastes? Part of the answer lies in evolution. FNAF never stagnated. Each new game introduced different mechanics, settings, and perspectives while maintaining core identity. From the original stationary horror to FNAF 2's mask mechanic, from FNAF 3's audio and ventilation systems to FNAF 4's directional listening, from sister locations' exploration elements to Pizzeria Simulator's tycoon facade, from Ultimate Custom Night's overwhelming challenge to help Wanted's VR immersion. From Security Breach's open exploration to Into the Pit's time-traveling investigation, each entry offered something distinct, and this variety prevented franchise fatigue, while allowing Cawthon and subsequent developers to explore different aspects of horror and gameplay. The lore evolution similarly kept things fresh. Early games established mysteries about murdered children and possessed animatronics. Later entries expanded into underground facilities, remnant experimentation, digital consciousness, and mall-scale complexes. Characters like William Afton evolved from Shadowy Killer to Springtrap to Scraptrap to Glitchtrap, maintaining presence while changing forms. New characters like Vanny, Gregory, and Vanessa introduced fresh perspectives while connecting to established narrative threads. This constant expansion ensured that even longtime fans always had new content to analyze, new theories to develop, new connections to uncover. The community played an equally crucial role in sustaining FNAF's relevance. As mentioned previously, content creators continued producing FNAF videos years after initial release. But the community's contribution went beyond individual creators. Wikis meticulously documented every detail, creating comprehensive resources that helped new fans catch up and veteran fans verify information. Reddit communities maintained active discussion, with subreddits like r/Five Nights at Freddy's hosting hundreds of thousands of members sharing art, theories, and news. Discord servers provided spaces for real-time conversation and collaboration. Convention panels brought fans together in person, creating physical community spaces. This infrastructure, built and maintained by dedicated fans, ensured FNAF never lacked for places where enthusiasts could engage. The merchandise ecosystem also contributed significantly. Unlike many gaming franchises where merchandise arrives years after peak popularity, FNAF's extensive product line maintained constant visibility. Every new wave of Funko Pops, every book release, every clothing drop, every convention exclusive, all of these kept FNAF present in retail spaces and collector markets. Fans who discovered FNAF through one medium could find it in others, creating multiple entry points and sustaining interest across different demographics. The movie's success in 2023, nearly a decade after the first game, demonstrated that FNAF's appeal wasn't limited to those who experienced it in real time. New audiences discovered the franchise through the film, bringing fresh energy and perspectives to the community, and the fact that the movie worked as both nostalgia for longtime fans and introduction for newcomers showed FNAF's core concepts had universal appeal beyond specific games or moments. The announcement of a sequel confirmed that FNAF's cultural relevance extended well into the future, with major studios betting hundreds of millions that audiences would continue caring. The accessibility across platforms and price points also deserves recognition. FNAF games appeared on PC, mobile, consoles, and VR, ensuring anyone with any gaming device could experience them. Prices remained reasonable, with many entries available for under $10 and some released free. Books were available in libraries, accessible to readers without purchase. YouTube content was free to watch, and this low barrier to entry meant economic circumstances rarely prevented engagement, allowing FNAF to reach audiences that might have been excluded from more expensive franchises. The emotional resonance of the story contributed to lasting impact. At its core, FNAF is about children who were murdered, whose lives were stolen by a man driven by twisted obsessions. Their spirits, trapped in animatronic shells, seek release and revenge. This tragedy underlies all the jump scares and gameplay mechanics, providing emotional weight that pure horror often lacks. Players aren't just surviving nights. They're confronting the consequences of violence against innocence, witnessing the supernatural manifestation of unresolved trauma. This thematic depth, explored through books, games, and film, gives FNAF meaning beyond its surface-level scares, and the franchise also benefited from arriving at the perfect moment in internet and gaming culture. YouTube was mature enough to have established gaming content as mainstream, but young enough that formats and genres were still being explored. Mobile gaming was exploding, creating huge audiences for accessible titles. Indie development tools had advanced to where solo creators could produce professional quality experiences. Social media enabled rapid sharing and discussion. Streaming allowed real-time community experiences. FNAF emerged into this perfect storm of technological and cultural conditions, positioned ideally to maximize every advantage and weather every challenge. Scott Cawthon's handling of the franchise, even after stepping back from development, ensured quality control and respect for source material. His involvement in the movie prevented it from becoming a generic horror cash grab. His support for fan games and content creators showed genuine appreciation for the community. His willingness to acknowledge mistakes and make changes based on feedback demonstrated respect for audiences. This stewardship, passing the franchise to capable hands while maintaining oversight, prevented the kind of degradation that often accompanies long-running properties. The franchise's flexibility in tone also helped it endure. FNAF could be terrifying in the main games, contemplative in the novels, tragic in the lore, comedic in certain fan content, action-oriented in titles like Security Breach, and nostalgic in the movie. This tonal range meant different audiences could find aspects they connected with, and individual fans could engage differently based on mood or preference. You could analyze FNAF as serious horror, enjoy it as camp entertainment, appreciate it as mystery storytelling, or simply love the characters and world without deeper engagement. The generational appeal created interesting dynamics. Fans who discovered FNAF as teenagers in 2014 were adults by 2025, some with children of their own. They could share FNAF with the next generation, creating family connections around the franchise. Meanwhile, new young fans discovered it through modern releases, creating multi-generational fan base with diverse experiences but shared enthusiasm. This age range, from young children to adults in their 20s and beyond, demonstrated FNAF's universal appeal beyond narrow demographics. The competitive speedrunning and challenge scene also sustained engagement for hardcore players. Beating 2020 mode in the first game, completing 50/20 in Ultimate Custom Night, finding optimal strategies for difficult nights. These accomplishments required skill and dedication that kept players invested long after casual completion. Leaderboards, world records, and community challenges created ongoing goals beyond simply experiencing story content, giving mechanically oriented players reasons to return repeatedly. The franchise's willingness to acknowledge and incorporate fan creations showed respect for community contributions. Whether through Cawthon featuring fan games in official capacity, including the Living Tombstone song in the movie, giving YouTubers cameos in films and games, and/or acknowledging fan theories that influenced lore development, FNAF treated its community as partners rather than consumers. This reciprocal relationship encouraged continued engagement and creativity, knowing that contributions might be recognized or even become official. The unresolved mysteries ensured there was always more to discover and debate. Despite countless hours of analysis and discussion, fundamental questions remained about timeline details, character motivations, and ultimate meanings. Is Gregory who he appears to be? What's Vanny's complete backstory? How much of the book lore applies to games? What happened between Security Breach and its DLC? These ongoing mysteries gave theorists endless material, while preventing definitive conclusions that might make further discussion feel pointless. Looking at FNAF's position in 2025, it stands as one of the defining franchises of modern horror gaming. It's mentioned alongside Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and other genre-defining series. Despite its humble indie origins, it's taught in game design courses as an example of effective horror mechanics. It's studied in academic contexts for its community engagement and storytelling techniques. It's featured in crossovers with major franchises, validating its cultural significance. It's maintained active development across multiple media without burnout or significant decline in quality or interest. Perhaps most tellingly, FNAF has transcended being simply a horror franchise to become a broader cultural reference point. People who have never played the games recognize Freddy Fazbear. The phrase "Five Nights at Freddy's" communicates specific ideas about indie horror, YouTube culture, and early 2010s internet nostalgia. The franchise exists in public consciousness alongside much older and more established properties, proof that cult classics can emerge from anywhere, achieve anything, if the elements align correctly. The enduring legacy isn't just about commercial success, though the hundreds of millions in revenue demonstrate market viability. It's not just about cultural penetration, though the merchandise and media presence show remarkable reach. It's not just about community, though the active fan base remains one of gaming's largest and most dedicated. The legacy is about what FNAF represents, the proof that one person with talent, determination, and a willingness to embrace failure can create something that changes an entire industry. It's about demonstrating that audiences crave mystery and engagement, not just consumption. It's about showing that horror can be accessible, profitable, and meaningful without compromising artistic vision or integrity. Five Nights at Freddy's succeeded because it did everything right at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. It had compelling mechanics, mysterious lore, memorable characters, perfect timing, brilliant marketing through content creators, passionate community, consistent quality, bold evolution, and dedicated stewardship. Each element reinforced the others, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem that could weather challenges and capitalize on opportunities. This is why we're still talking about it, why new fans still discover it, why creators still make content around it, why the franchise continues growing and evolving over a decade after that first terrifying night. The cult classic status isn't debatable anymore. FNAF has achieved longevity, cultural impact, devoted fan base, and industry influence that define the category. It transcended its origins to become something larger, more meaningful, more enduring than its creator ever expected. And barring some catastrophic misstep, it will likely continue thriving for years to come, introducing new audiences to the horrors of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, while satisfying longtime fans with fresh experiences and deeper mysteries. That's the true mark of a cult classic, not just surviving but evolving, not just being remembered but remaining relevant, and not just having been great but continuing to matter. Five Nights at Freddy's has earned that distinction through every element we've explored tonight, and its legacy will likely influence horror gaming for decades to come. Closing reflection. As we come to the end of this exploration, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate the full scope of what Five Nights at Freddy's has accomplished. From Scott Cawthon's desperate final attempt at game development success to a multimedia empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The journey defies every expectation about how indie games should behave, how horror franchises should evolve, and how cult classics should emerge. This wasn't manufactured through corporate calculation or marketing budgets, and it grew organically from genuine creativity, meeting passionate audience at the perfect cultural moment, then sustaining that connection through constant evolution and community engagement. What makes a FNAF a cult classic in horror gaming isn't any single element, but the combination of revolutionary simplicity in gameplay, mysterious depth in storytelling, perfect timing with YouTube's golden age, dedicated community that elevated the franchise beyond its creators' wildest dreams, Scott Cawthon's vision and integrity as steward, cultural penetration that transcended gaming to reach mainstream consciousness, multimedia expansion that introduced FNAF to diverse audiences through books, merchandise, and film, lasting innovation that changed how horror games are made and marketed, and enduring relevance that keeps the franchise thriving over a decade after its debut. Each of these elements reinforce the others, creating something much greater than the sum of its parts. The franchise succeeded because it respected its audience. It didn't handhold or explain everything. It trusted players to engage, to think, to theorize, to create. It provided frameworks and then stepped back, letting community build the rest. This collaborative approach to storytelling and experience created ownership and investment that traditional top-down entertainment rarely achieves. Fans didn't just consume FNAF. They participated in it, shaped it, became part of it in meaningful ways that made the franchise feel like theirs as much as Cawthon's. FNAF also demonstrated that limitations can be strengths when embraced rather than hidden, and the static gameplay wasn't a compromise. It was a deliberate choice that created unique psychological horror. The cryptic lore wasn't confusing obfuscation. It was purposeful mystery that invited investigation. The rapid development cycles weren't rushed cash grabs. They were passionate iterations maintaining momentum. Every apparent weakness examined closely reveals itself as carefully considered strength. The franchise's impact extends beyond its own success to influence an entire generation of creators and players. Countless developers cite FNAF as inspiration, as proof that indie horror could compete commercially, as demonstration that community engagement matters as much as production values. Countless players discovered horror gaming through FNAF, developing passion that led them to explore broader genre. And the franchise's fingerprints appear across modern gaming in ways both obvious and subtle. From mechanical innovations to marketing strategies to community expectations. Looking forward, FNAF shows no signs of slowing. The sequel movie released in December 2025 to continued box office success. New games continue development. The community remains active and growing. Merchandise lines expand. The franchise has achieved self-sustaining momentum, where each new release generates content and discussion that maintain visibility until the next release, creating perpetual relevance that most franchises struggle to achieve even briefly. But beyond commercial success and cultural impact, FNAF represents something important about creativity and perseverance. Scott Cawthon could have given up after Chipper and Sons failed, and he could have accepted that game development wasn't his path, that years of struggling weren't leading anywhere. Instead, he transformed criticism into inspiration, turned perceived failure into intentional design, created one last game that would either prove his worth or provide closure. That decision to try once more, to embrace rather than avoid what made reviewers uncomfortable, to trust his vision despite every rational reason to quit. That decision changed not just his life, but an entire medium. This is what cult classics do. They emerge from passion rather than calculation, from creators who believe in their vision enough to risk everything, from audiences hungry for experiences that trust and challenge them. They build communities rather than customer bases, collaborative relationships rather than transactional ones. They endure not through corporate backing, but through genuine merit, through creating something so meaningful that people refuse to let it fade. Five Nights at Freddy's achieved cult classic status by being exactly what it needed to be at exactly the right time, then evolving without losing identity, expanding without diluting vision, succeeding without compromising integrity. It transformed one man's last chance into a defining franchise of modern horror gaming, proof that talent, timing, and determination can overcome any obstacle, any limitation, any expectation. That's why we're still talking about it. That's why we'll likely continue talking about it for years to come. Because great stories, whether told through games or books or films or any medium, don't just entertain. They become part of us, part of our shared culture, a part of how we understand the world and connect with each other. And on a quiet night, when you hear distant laughter or see something move in your peripheral vision, when that small voice in your head whispers that maybe you should check the cameras one more time, you'll know that FNAF succeeded in its ultimate goal. It scared us. It fascinated us. It became part of our collective nightmares and our shared enthusiasm. It proved that a simple game about surviving 5 nights could become something much more significant, much more lasting, much more meaningful than anyone expected. That transformation from desperate experiment to cultural phenomenon, that journey from indie obscurity to multimedia empire, that evolution from one man's vision to millions of fans' passion, that is what makes Five Nights at Freddy's a true cult classic in horror gaming. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into what makes FNAF special, into the elements that transformed it from a simple horror game into a cultural institution, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps create more of these thoughtful explorations, these long-form examinations of gaming culture and franchise history. And let me know in the comments what you'd like to explore next. There are so many stories worth telling, so many franchises worth understanding, so many moments worth revisiting. Until then, sleep well. And remember, Freddy and his friends are always watching, always waiting, always ready to welcome you back to the pizzeria for just one more night. Good night.